Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and right next to me I've got my two oldest worm bins. Both of these bins have now been in the process of horizontal migration for 8 weeks now. Can you believe it? 8 weeks. I don't think I've ever taken that much time to try to horizontally migrate worms out of their finished castings. And luckily, in the case of the second oldest bin, the bin with my original red worms, 9 days ago already, I was already able to succeed in doing the first haul out of worms. Luckily, the material in the second oldest bin had already dried off to the point where we were able to collect up the worms out of the migration area. And then I reset the migration area, and the migration continues, the depopulation of the castings continues. But in the older of the two bins, my goodness, 8 weeks later, I just went into here, I was tilling the material in the system around, and it's still loaded with worms. How many worms have actually made their way into the horizontal migration feeding zone? I really don't know. So usually I would put on a glove and get the camera rolling long before this, but I was just down here trying to take care of things, and I sort of dove right into this without the camera. But I figured, you know what? I've come up with a strategy on dealing with the overly damp material, and I think this is the point where we're going to actually bring my VermiBag tote is coming back into service. So I put it into its frame. And you know, I got a feeling the VermiBag tote is just what the doctor ordered for this problem here, because the bag is a porous material. It'll allow for the material to dry in all directions, hopefully. That's really what I'm hoping for. So hopefully by moving the material over into the VermiBag tote, it'll dry to the point where the worms will actually move out of this stuff. And the other thing that I want to do today is actually do the haul out of the worms that have successfully moved into the horizontal feeding zone, into the migration zone. So I've got a bin that's already been set up for them for 7 weeks now. So 8 weeks of migrating, a newly built bin for 7 weeks, just waiting for worms to be put into it. So today we're going to be launching a new worm bin with these worms, and hopefully we're going to solve the problem of the drying of the compost by moving it into the bag. So I'm going to put a glove on, and we're going to get to work. So the first order of business is going to be the haul out of the worms. So we've got the bin that's been undergoing horizontal migration on the right, and their new home, the bin that was built for them 7 weeks ago, here on the left, as well as a label with which we're going to label the new system after we launch the worms into it. So we won't need this until we're finished. That will come last. Now, I usually use some sort of a transport container to put the worms into briefly until we plop them into their new home, but by setting this up over here side by side the way it is, I'm wondering if we might be able to just scoop them out and place them into their new home, kind of one handful at a time. It might not be as interesting as releasing an entire load of worms at once and watching them slither into place, but it does seem like the most practical approach. So I'm definitely curious to see what kind of a turnout we've got in here. There were so many worms in the finished castings that I do wonder how we did as far as rounding up the worms for this first haul out. As I usually do, I'm going to attempt to show you guys, to the best of my ability, the worms as I extract them from their old home and release them into their new home. And a lot of times I'll do this in such a way that I play the video back fast so that you can see all the worms squirming. But somehow the way we're doing it here today doesn't seem like it's going to lend itself to that approach. So we're just going to sort of bring them over one handful at a time, hopefully providing us some pretty good visibility into how many worms are being moved into the system. And as I usually do, I'd like to get everyone's input with what they think in terms of the number of worms that we'll use to launch this new system with. So like here, for example, a huge mound of worms that would be kind of difficult to see if I didn't really point them out and spread them around, because they're just in a big pile. And yeah, I'm kind of surprised that the Brussels sprouts held out so long. I'm questioning whether I'd even frozen them before I placed them in here. I might not have, because most frozen stuff starts to get all mushy and gooey and the worms eat it right up. But in the case of those Brussels sprout leaves, I'm wondering if they might have been placed in here fresh and raw. So that's another pretty decent sized handful of worms that we just hauled out there. It is nice to see that we managed to get a pretty good turnout over here. And I would imagine that, after 8 weeks, it is realistic to expect that that's what should have happened. We've been putting food in there. We've been keeping it moist by covering it with plastic. Fresh bedding applied pretty regularly, along with fresh foods. So I'm already starting to get a little number coming together in my head, even though I haven't seen the entire turnout yet. Like here too, just so many worms in that last handful. Look at them all. They're all over the place. Nice turnout. And whatever worms come together, after we do another haul out at some point in the future, after the material has started drying out, those worms are going to be placed in here too. When I had done the haul outs, or the haul out of the original worms out of that other bin that I showed you earlier, I had actually launched off 2 worm bins with all those worms. And there was a good number of worms, so there was plenty to go around to launch 2 new systems. Here we're simply launching 1 system with all these worms. And it does seem like a pretty good sized number of worms with which to launch this system. So this is going to be a fun bin, I think. Pretty heavily populated system. Lots and lots of worms in it. This here too looks like it's going to be another handful with many worms in it. Let's see what we got here. Oh yeah, look at them all. Another pretty massive quantity of worms in that last handful. And at this point, I guess we've just got a little bit of cleanup to do here as far as picking out the last few worms that are still over here where the collection area was. And whatever little bits of scraps of bedding and food that still remain over here, let's get those placed over as well. And the next thing to follow is going to be the extraction of all this finished castings. It's also got a bunch of worms still living in it. And moving that stuff over into the bag where I believe it has a much greater chance at finally drying out to the point where we can see a successful exit of the worms out of the material, possibly spurred on by the dryness of the material. So I just don't want to leave any unfortunate little worms stuck to the walls of this container, so I'm just trying to be thorough here and make sure even the little tiny ones that are not in the castings are collected up and relocated into the castings, because now the castings is what's next to be placed over into the bag. And I think I've got them all, so that's pretty good. So I think we can just go ahead and take this nice new system, which at this point has most of the worms over on this side, but hopefully they feel comfortable enough to move over onto the other side of the bin. This stuff's been sitting around for 7 weeks now, sort of priming and becoming nice and juicy and soft and comfortable. It's all shredded paper, cardboard, leaves, and fairly damp for that matter. So I got a feeling that the worms are going to enjoy it. The stuff that was covering it earlier I think is also going to be a good suitable covering. This piece of paper is pretty thorough, going all the way around, all the way out to the 4 corners and up to the edges. And I'm even questioning whether we need to go with both of these plastic bags as top covering, because I bet you if we were to go with only one of them and even leaving a little bit of airflow for the edges, that's going to be just fine. Because with the increased humidity that I'm observing, it seems like a lot of my systems are doing just fine in terms of hanging on their moisture. Not so much evaporation going on now as in the winter time. So next step is going to be to get our new system out of our way, move it over to the somewhere and get the bag out here so we can empty the contents of what remains over here in this old system into there. So that comes next. So now, when I was tilling the material around in the hopes that I might just be able to aerate it to help it dry, like I said earlier, I saw so many worms. And then I did actually go through the process of tilling the material around for a while. So I think it has already been aerated to a certain degree, but I think just the process of moving it from here to there is also going to allow us the opportunity to try to till it up a little bit. I'm just curious to see how many worms are in it. Maybe I just got a sense of there being many more because I was sort of focusing my attention to the section that was near the horizontal migration feeding zone. Perhaps the section of the bin furthest from the feeding zone has already been depopulated to a certain point. But you know, with all the moisture that I could feel in this stuff, I have a feeling that there's still going to be quite a lot of worms hanging out in this stuff. Perfectly content to stay in it as long as it remains damp. So I really hope that by putting it into this container, we're going to see the material finally dry and become crumbly and get to the point where we can initiate another migration at some point in the near future, one that'll actually succeed in depopulating the castings so that we can finally harvest them and make use of them out in the garden, rather than just having a sort of perpetual home for the worms to hang out in. I'm just sort of spreading it around as I go, evenly down into the bottom of the container. It did seem to me like the amount of material that we're going to have in here is going to be, you know, not too much to overload the container. Or at least that's what it looks like so far. Yeah, I think we're going to be in pretty good shape. I just don't want there to be like a big mass of material in the middle that hangs onto its moisture. I like for the stuff to be in here kind of thin. The top of the material exposed to the air will, I believe, dry most quickly because the VermiBag actually has a vent hole, pretty good sized vent hole on the top. It's a mesh. It's like a screen, which allows for a good bit of aeration. And I won't be covering the material itself so that any moisture that wants to escape from it will have the opportunity to do so. Although now that the weather is becoming more and more humid, it's probably not going to go as quickly as if I had done it in the winter time or during a portion of the year when the air in the house is much drier due to the climate control running. So yeah, you can see there's still a good number of worms remaining in this stuff. Quite content to stay, I believe, as long as the material's as damp as it is here. And I really am curious to see how long it's going to take for this stuff to finally get dry enough that the worms feel motivated to leave it and start looking for something a little bit more comfortable. And at that point I think I will set up another migration, but at the current time, no. We're just going to focus on drying, and at some point when it seems like the material is finally getting a little bit dry, a little bit more crumbly, then I'll maybe nudge it over and initiate another migration of the worms within this stuff here in the bag. So I think I've got the majority of them, if not all of them. Let's take a quick look here. Do we got all the worms? A couple castings here and there remaining, but as far as I could see, we've got all the worms. I will take another closer look just to make sure no little itsy bitsy tiny ones that are almost invisible to the naked eye haven't remained in here. And then we'll feel comfortable that it's safe to just go rinse the tub out and make it available for some other use. And you know, it seems pretty clear now to me why this is taking such a long time over here, because, well, you know, I wanted to take the label off and reposition it over here on the bag. But basically you can read it, I think, right? It's a Friday the 13th bin. Except I'm mangling the poor label. I wanted to get the label off in one piece so that I can relocate it and place it onto the VermiBag, and it won't get soaked when I go clean off the bin. Here we go. I just managed to get it off, so I'll just stick it over here onto the frame of the VermiBag tote. And now this continues, and we're only I don't even know. I think this system is very close to being 400 days old at this point. I mean, I could even ask my little smartphone here. How many days have passed since May the 13th, 2022?
It was 392 days ago.
Yeah, we're only 8 days away from this system hitting 400 days of age. And I don't think that we're going to be able to harvest the castings by then, so it's probably going to be in excess of 400 days by the time we're able to feel like we've gotten all the worms out of here. In fact, I might not even initiate the migration of the worms out of this stuff until after. So I think we're almost done, but there's only one more thing, one more order of business that still needs to be tended to. That's right. Some of you might have already guessed. It's the christening of the newest bin in my wormery. Please join me in welcoming the newest of my worm bins. A bin full of red wiggler worms. How many? I don't know. I want to hear from you. What do you think? How many worms did we release into here? Please put your comments down below. Give me your best estimate. At the end, like I always do, I'm going to average all of our guesses together, and that's going to become the official worm count for this system. Alright everyone, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.